The dry dock at Yokosuka had a roof over it, which is not a thing dry docks tend to have. Under that roof, in the third week of November 1944, the captain of the ship inside it asked his superiors for more time and was told there was none. The bilge pumps were not finished and neither were the fire mains, Toshio Abe reported back, and the answer he got was that the ship would sail on the 28th. She would sail at night, which was also not what he had asked for. He had been handed the largest warship in the world, and 10 days in which to learn her. Shinano began in May of 1940 as the third Yamato-class battleship. After Midway, the Navy tore up that design and finished her as an aircraft carrier instead. Yokosuka walled her dock in concrete and roofed it over so that nothing showed from the air or from the hills above the yard, and forbade the workmen to leave their stations. 2 photographs of her survive, and neither was taken by anybody with permission to take it. The launching on October 8th went wrong when a caisson at the end of the dock took on ballast badly, lifted as the water came in, and shoved 70,000 tons of ship forward into the wall, damaging her bow. The yard patched that in a hurry, cut her trials short, and she went into commission on November 19th. Why anybody sent a ship in that condition out of the dock is the first thing worth settling. The order has a date on it and a reason. Yokosuka was the best-equipped naval yard in Japan, and she was sitting inside it, with the men who had built her still walking her passages. The decision to take her out of that dock and run her down the coast at night with the work unfinished was a considered one, and it was taken well above her captain. What she carried on that passage says something about the state of the war. 50 Oka rocket-propelled suicide aircraft went into her, along with the kamikaze personnel who were to fly them, and 6 Shinyo explosive motorboats went aboard with them. More than 2,500 people were on her when she sailed. A large number of them were shipyard workers who had never been to sea in anything. Sending her to sea unfinished was the safer of 2 bad choices. On the 1st of November, a B-29 flying reconnaissance over the Tokyo area photographed her in the dock in the last stages of fitting out. Until that morning, no American file contained her. The Navy Ministry understood what the photograph meant as soon as it understood the photograph existed. Because a ship that cannot move is a target with an address. And the bombers had started coming. So she would go to Kure, where the rest of the work could be finished and where her aircraft were already waiting for her. Her crew were sailors, and that needs saying because the easy version of this story treats them as incompetents, and they were nothing of the kind. What they had never been was a crew in this ship. A warship is handed to her people by degrees. She runs her machinery up in stages, floods, and pumps out her own spaces to see what her valves and her drains do, and works her damage control parties until they can find a compartment in the dark. Shinano got none of that. Many of her watertight doors had not gone in. Openings through her bulkheads stood open because men were still working through them, and her damage control organization existed on paper and had done its training on paper. Nobody aboard had ever put water into her, watched where it went, and learned which of her compartments talked to which. That is the second question, and it stays open a long time. How a hull with a 16-inch belt and an armored flight deck died to the one weapon her designers had spent a decade planning against. She left Yokosuka at 6 in the evening on November 28th of November, 3 destroyers around her. Isakaze, Yukikaze, and Hamikaze. The same 3 had been screening the battleship Kongo a week earlier when a submarine sank her in the Formosa Strait. They came to this assignment with a very recent education in what happened to capital ships in home waters. None of that education was going to matter. There was one other ship in that water, and her reason for being there had nothing to do with Shinano. Archerfish was a Balau-class boat of about 1,500 tons on the surface on her fifth war patrol, with almost nothing on her record from the first four. Her commanding officer had asked to be relieved of an earlier command after failing to press home an attack on a carrier, spent a stretch running a rest camp at Midway, and talked his way back to sea. Joseph Enright had been given a second chance and had not yet done anything with it. His assignment off Tokyo Bay was lifeguard duty. When the B-29s began flying against Tokyo out of the Marianas, somebody had to sit in the water underneath the route and pick up the crews who ditched, and Archerfish was that somebody. On the November 28th, the word came through that no strike would fly that day. That released her to hunt. This is the hinge of the whole night. The bomber campaign put Shinano to sea before she was ready. By photographing her where she lay, the same bomber campaign put a submarine across the only water she could cross. By needing somebody underneath the flight path, neither effect was designed in relation to the other. They were two separate consequences of one American operation, and they arrived in the same square of ocean on the same evening. Enright's lookouts had a contact at about 8:45, first as a shape they took for a tanker, then as something a great deal larger with 3 escorts around it. He surfaced and began to track. The next 6 hours are the part of the war that never photographs well. Shinano was making 18 knots, and Archerfish could not hold that submerged and could not quite hold it on the surface, so a submerged approach was out, and a surface chase in bright moonlight inside the escort's radar horizon, off the enemy's own capital, was the only thing available. A submarine on the surface at night is a small dark object in a large dark sea. And she is also a boat that cannot dive fast enough if a destroyer turns toward her at 30 knots. Enright ran parallel and waited for a geometry he had no means of forcing. He waited most of the night for it. Shinano's lookouts found him somewhere in those 6 hours, and Abe drew a conclusion that made sense and was wrong. He decided he was being shadowed by one boat of a pack, sent to pull his destroyers off the screen while the rest of it got into position. So he held his escorts close and did not detach them to hunt. Then he zigzagged, which is the correct response to a submarine threat and which, on this particular night, walked 70,000 tons of ship across the bow of the only submarine in that sea. There was no pack. There was one boat, and she was slower than the ship she was chasing. Just after 3 in the morning, Archerfish fired 6 torpedoes set to run shallow. At 9 minutes past 3, 4 of them hit Shinano's starboard side. They struck below the waterline and above the anti-torpedo bulges in the seam between 2 kinds of protection, which is close to the only place on that hull where a torpedo could do serious work. Abe ordered 3 outboard boiler rooms on the port side flooded to bring her upright, and it worked. She came back near level and kept steaming. He also decided to hold her speed, on the reasoning that the armor had absorbed the damage and the priority now was to get clear of the submarine before it could set up a second attack. That reasoning was sound with the information he had. It was also the decision that killed her, because every hour at speed drove more water through the openings below her waterline. Then the water kept moving. It traveled through door frames with no doors in them. It found bulkhead penetrations still open because nobody had finished the pipework running through them. And it went out of compartments meant to flood and into compartments that were not. There is no evidence that anybody aboard held a reliable picture of where it had reached, for the plain reason that nobody aboard had watched water move in this ship before. Survivors described damaged control gear that men could not work, and doors that had gone in and still leaked. The organization whose job this was had come together a few weeks earlier. That is the answer to the second question. And it has very little to do with the weapons. 4 torpedoes into a finished Shinano with a worked-up crew is a bad morning and 8 months in a dock. 4 torpedoes into this one was fatal from somewhere around the 3rd hour. The men on her bridge spent the next 7 hours finding that out one compartment at a time. She made 36 miles from the point where she was hit. Then the feed water for her boilers failed and she stopped. 2 destroyers put lines aboard and tried to tow the largest warship ever built in open sea at a list that was getting worse by the hour. It did not work and could not have worked, because 65,000 tons does not move behind a pair of destroyers, and they tried it because there was nothing else left to try. Almost everything anybody knows about that morning came out of interrogations run a year later, with clipboards in a country that had spent 4 years making certain the ship did not exist. There's a great deal more of that paper than most people would guess. Subscribe, and it turns up here about once a week. At 18 minutes past 10 in the morning, Abe gave the order to abandon ship. Yukikaze came alongside to take men off her at 57 minutes past 10. Shinano rolled over and went down by the stern. 65 miles off Honshu, 17 hours out of Yokosuka. She had been a commissioned warship for 10 days. Abe stayed with her, and so did both of his navigation officers, and so did 1,435 other men. Rescuers pulled 1,080 out of the water, among them 32 shipyard workers and 3 Oka pilots who had been passengers on somebody else's ship. Enright reported sinking a carrier of about 28,000 tons. When Archerfish reached Guam on the December 15th, the operations officer told him Navy intelligence would not support the claim. Counts on the reasonable ground that no carrier answering that description existed in Japanese home waters for him to have sunk. No such ship appeared on any American list. The code breakers had never seen her either, because a ship nobody signaled about generates no signals to read. He got his credit in the end. The tonnage went up twice, and the argument was not settled until after the surrender. 3 weeks later it happened again, and faster. The second time the ship went down in 7 minutes. On December 17th, the carrier Unryu left Kure for Manila with 30 Oka aboard and a cargo of equipment for the defense of Luzon under Captain Kaname Konishi. Konishi had spent most of the war commanding the destroyers that screened carriers and now had one of his own. He took her out through the Shimonoseki Strait rather than the Bungo Channel to avoid submarines, and ran into a typhoon that slowed him and put him behind schedule. On the 19th, in the East China Sea southeast of Shanghai, the submarine Redfish put a torpedo into her starboard side under the island. It cut her main steam line, flooded 2 boiler rooms, and stopped her dead. 15 minutes later, as she was getting underway again, a second torpedo went in, abreast the forward elevator, and set off the Oka warheads and the aviation gasoline stowed beneath them. She went over at 90 degrees and sank. Konishi went down with her, along with his executive officer, his navigation officers, and 1,238 other men. The destroyers recovered 146 survivors, 1 officer, 87 petty officers and ratings, and 57 passengers. 2 fleet carriers, both new, both lost inside 3 weeks in home or near home waters, to 2 submarines that between them lost nobody at all. 2,673 dead. In both cases, the officers who could have accounted for what was decided on the bridge went to the bottom with the ship. So what the Imperial Japanese Navy learned about either loss it learned from ratings, from passengers, and from men who had been aboard a matter of days. On Shinano, The people who knew the ship best were the shipyard workers, and 32 of them lived to say so.